Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder when I head out for a walk and deliver an episode to you while I stroll around. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good morning, dear listeners. It's a nice sunny day here in suburban Chicago. Sun is out. The construction workers are working hard on a couple more houses across the street. And I'm out for a walk. If I sound different than I have in the last couple months, it's because I'm trying out a new option for how I record the podcast. For the bulk of the time that I've recorded this podcast, I've used a lapel mic that clipped into the audio jack on my phone. About sometime in like February or March, my phone started failing to record, and what it turned out that the audio jack on my phone is getting a little loose, and so what would happen is I would start the recording, I'd start walking, and at some point during the walk the jack on the mic would slip a little, disconnect, and that would stop the recording, and so I would end up recording a whole podcast and not being able to use it because I didn't actually record it. This happened to the point where it was happening more than was acceptable, and so I switched to using a handheld mic, which is of much better quality, but I'm afraid I was unable to control the thumping. I don't know if it's bothered you as much as it's bothered me, but the last few months I've had a significant level of incidental noise that comes from me holding the microphone. I tried holding it in different ways and a number of different elements regarding how I handled the microphone, and I was never able to resolve it sufficiently. Also, if I wasn't careful, I would get the percussive P sound in the recording at a level that I was not happy with as well. And frankly, sometimes when it was windy, the wind would blow across the microphone too much as well. So a huge level of interference from the microphone on my part. So the other day I was going through one of my drawers and I found my daughter's old phone. Now we've never really bought the kids top of the line phones because we just don't have the money for that, and kids break things. So we had originally bought her a sort of low-end smartphone that was mostly slow. Like if you tried to do anything fast, it had slow internet and didn't have a ton of processing power. But it actually worked pretty well for day-to-day stuff. Overall, it served her well for 2 years, and then we got her a newer phone. She has I think it's a Galaxy S8 now, which is a generation or two ahead of the phone I use that needs replacing now. But her old phone was still functional. It just was old and slow. It couldn't do most of what a teenage person would want their phone to do, and so we got her a new phone last year sometime. And the old phone, it's just been sitting in my drawer. Well, it occurred to me that perhaps the old phone could become my audio recorder for the podcast. So that's what I'm trying today. The long and short of it is I did a factory wipe on her old phone, and all it has on it now is an audio recording app. And I tried plugging in the lapel mic and I tested it and it worked to record. So now I'm trying it longer form. So this is episode 259 of the podcast, and we'll see if it worked. You won't hear any of this, I guess, if it didn't work, because I will not release this episode if it sounds like crap. But the test made it sound like it was all right. So here we go. So for episode 259, I thought I would return to a feature I haven't done in a while, and that's your board game sommelier. As a reminder, the board game sommelier feature is where I choose a topic, and then I offer you some sort of media to read or engage with, and then a board game to play centered around that theme. So for instance, in the past I've done, I think the last one, what was the last one that I did? It was like back in March, I think, or April. I have done them in the past. I did one about each of the seasons. I did one about elections, yeah. So the way I do it is I pick out a couple sub-themes and I talk about a movie or book that I think fits that sub-theme. And then I talk about a game that fits that sub-theme. So there we go. So let's just jump right into it. I'm recording this 4 days before Labor Day, and our house revolves around the rhythm of school. I'm the only person in my family not back in school at this point. My wife's a 7th and 8th grade teacher, and her school has started up. My kids are in 7th grade and 9th grade respectively, and both of their schools have started, although they're home doing remote schooling this year. And then there's me. I'm finalizing class planning, and my school starts next week. So, what a good time to talk about it. I thought I picked 3 themes that seem to fit the overall ebb and flow, the overall idea of school. And so that's what I thought I would talk about today. The first one is the misery of youth in school. This is a common theme because it's a common experience that middle school, as we call it in the US, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, maybe 9th grade, these are trying times. It's a time when popularity reigns supreme. It's a time when kids are trying to figure out who they are. They're starting to branch out and be individuals outside of their family and figure out what that means. Sometimes there's some rebellion there as kids try on different personas and experiment with friendship and relationships. So it's a shocking time. They also are physically changing from children into adults and or children into young adults, and they're starting to really do school in a difficult way and have to differentiate a bit more as their skill levels change. There's also a lot of bullying and cliques, and so in popular culture and the way we talk about middle school particularly, or school for the youth, this idea that school is this horrifying, terrifying place comes up a lot. So I was thinking about, what is a text, a movie, or a book that you could read that does this? I mean, a lot of young adult literature is focused on this. There are a lot of films as well. My kids are fans of something like Diary of a Wimpy Kid. I think the recent Julia Roberts movie, I'm forgetting the name of it now, about the boy with facial scars from, I think it was a birth defect. I can't remember the name of it. It's quite touching, and it's a lovely movie that you should watch. Would be an example, but that one's actually more heartwarming. I'm thinking about something about the terrors of youth. And so even though they're a bit younger than middle school, I think the best movie to watch that really captures this feeling is Matilda. Matilda, of course, was directed by Danny DeVito, and stars Danny DeVito, as was Rhea Perlman, and an Australian lady whose name I do not know, who is the sort of vile headmistress of the school, and makes for an excellent film. And then, of course, there's the girl who's the star of the movie, and for the life of me, I can't remember her name either. I would totally know it if I saw it, but off the top of my head, I can't get it. But I'll suggest as a film to watch, Matilda would be well worth your time, and worth giving a few minutes to. Which leads me to a game, and I think the game that fits that theme best is Miskatonic School for Girls. This is a deck building game from Fun to 11 Games designer Luke Peterschmidt. The art is by his wife, Emily Peterschmidt, I think. It's got a sort of scratchy watercolor look to it. And the premise is that you have one house of a school of girls at the Miskatonic School for Girls, a boarding school in Miskatonic, Arkham, Massachusetts, near the Miskatonic River. This is, of course, the setting for Lovecraft, and all of the teachers at the school are Lovecraftian monsters. And so the twist of it, or the amusing element of it, is that the teachers are literally trying to kill the students or menace the students and drive them crazy. And so your goal is to stay sane as long as you can. The other twist in this game is, as a deck building game, you build your deck and you build your opponent's deck. In your deck, you're going to put students or friends who will help you, and you also are going to put into your opponent's decks vile teachers who will disrupt them. Miskatonic School for Girls is one of the early hobby games we got. It's fun. It's silly. It's pretty luck heavy. I mean, you have some control and some choice about which cards you're going to put in your deck. But often it comes down to the most expensive card you can afford is the one that you should put in your deck. And the most expensive enemy you can afford is the one you should put in your opponent's deck. And then it's sort of luck which cards you draw and how well you can defend yourself against the other teachers. That said, it's pretty fun, especially if they did an expansion, the Winter Break expansion, which mixes in a few new teachers and adds some special powers that give the game a little extra sauce, enough to make it great. So there you go. For youth terror in school, I would say Matilda and Miskatonic School for Girls. So when thinking about the life of the mind, the idea of study and depth and growth, I thought about a couple options. One that is particularly good is Restoration, a Robert Downey Jr. film from the late 90s, early 2000s, in which he plays, not a stretch of the time, a man who's been sort of destroyed by his own poor choices and ends up trying to become better by becoming selfless. It takes place during the Restoration era in the plague, and it's really good. Definitely worth a watch if you get a chance. Although I will say I saw it once in the theater and thought it was amazing, and then I happened upon it at a DVD store early in my DVD collection era. I would say it was one of the first 10 DVDs I bought, and I've watched it maybe once since then, so it's been a long time. But that was one thought. Or if you want something more modern and maybe a little weirder, think about Pi. This is an early Darren Aronofsky film, in fact, the first one that got any kind of wide release. And it's about a person trying to figure out how to use a computer program to predict the stock market, and also learning to play Go at the same time, or learning to be very good at Go. It's a really trippy movie, very strange, but wonderful. So for a movie about a life of the mind, consider Pi or Restoration. And so what's a game that would go with that? I think there are a couple that I considered. One that I considered pretty heavily was The Alchemists. This is a game certainly about the life of the mind, and it has the pleasure of being a game where you have to solve a puzzle also. So it's got life of the mind and being of the mind. But being about magic and alchemy, it's a little less effective for me than some other things, which led me to Newton. Newton is one of these tracks on tracks games from that group of Italian designers who did stuff like Zolkin and Coimbra and Lorenzo Il Magnifico. These are all good games that I really enjoy. Although I don't know that I need, well, one, I don't have any of them in my collection because this isn't a game that anyone else in my family would enjoy. I have Orleans, which is not from that Italian group, but does sort of have the tracks on tracks element of these different tracks that you climb up that get you bonuses. And then there's a track that you get scoring on. And then there's a map that you move around and lay tiles on. I mean, all of that is well and good, but not quite in line with the game where you have a bunch of different things that you're moving around in a bunch of different ways that you're influencing systems, and then you're increasing or decreasing on a variety of tracks altogether. So those together have made a sort of subgenre. My favorite of these that I've played is Coimbra, which also has the map, so it's a little bit like Orleans in the look of the game, although the gameplay is very different. But the one that I would point to here that fits our theme of life of the mind is Newton. In Newton, you play a Renaissance era or Enlightenment era scientist who is trying to discover the secrets of the cosmos, the secrets of the universe, in a time when natural philosophy is how you would describe science, and medicine, chemistry, biology, physics, and math all kind of intertwine in important ways. In the game, you're traveling around Europe, you're getting apprentices, you're learning things, you're publishing books, and all of these things give you points, of course. I thought Newton was pretty fun. It was a little too much manipulating tracks on tracks for me. But that might just be from a first play. I don't know, maybe future plays I would like it better. I find these games actually really shine once you understand the intricacies of the systems and how they interrelate. I've come to enjoy Russian Railroads quite a bit more as I've played it more times. But the early games of it, I found it was just a little too abstracted. That said, this genre is not my favorite because it feels abstracted to me. Nonetheless, I think for Life of the Mind games, it'd be hard to do better than something like Restoration and Newton. As a potential substitute for Newton, the makers of Coimbra have a new game, either that just came out or is coming out very soon, called Alma Mater, which looks a lot like Coimbra, but sounds thematically a lot like Newton. So if you're interested in the idea of being a scholar and that sort of thing, Alma Mater might be up your alley there. I haven't played that one. So this last one, with school, big part of school for me is books. Understanding books, exploring books, thinking about books. So, of course, there needs to be a game about books. There's a couple options. There's the Library of Alexandria, which is a game about trying to save books in the Library of Alexandria. For a little while, I had the game Alexandria, which was also about the fire in the Library of Alexandria. I didn't think that one was very good. The Library of Alexandria I haven't played. There's also Biblios, which is about creating and collecting books nominally, but it's basically an abstract game. The theme is very light. And then there's the game that I would put highest on this list that's sort of about books and book collecting, and that would be Ex Libris. This is a game that I've played a number of times. It's in our 20 for 5 this year. And it's just a delight to recruit books and organize them, alphabetize them, and so on. And it's very funny. I like the theme. It's fun to play. I think the individual player powers are wildly unbalanced, and so that can be a problem. But ultimately, it's pretty good. That's Ex Libris from Renegade Games. Now, what movie would go with that, or book? This is much harder. There are lots of sort of mystical librarians or interesting libraries in fiction. But generally the librarians are a resource that the active characters use. The librarians aren't the active characters themselves. You think about something like Buffy the Vampire Slayer or Angel, the librarians in those shows become narrative features that allow for particular kinds of stories to be told, but generally the librarians are not the active characters. You do have the librarian characters in the TV show, or I guess series of TV movies called The Librarians, but in that show, the curator of the library stays back at the library, and the quote-unquote librarians are really like adventurers who work at the library. It's strange. So that, I guess, the closest I could get on a movie level would be the librarians. On books, we have a bit more room. There is a book, I think it's called The Quintessence, that is about a librarian and a deep mystery. There are a number of books about archaeological or linguistic mysteries that involve rare manuscripts. The Dan Brown series that starred Tom Hanks, The Da Vinci Code and Angels and Demons. These are stories about an academic, of course, again, an adventurous academic. But the idea that librarians understand deep knowledge, and that they would discover something while in their work, I think is really interesting and worth pursuing, perhaps, as something you could be interested in. And I would suggest, it's called The Great Imperfection. Boom. I'm sure of it. The Great Imperfection. I will post a link to it in the show notes if you're interested in reading it, but it's a novel about somebody tied up in books and a library. That's what I would offer as my accompaniment to the game Ex Libris. Future Brendan here. The name of the novel is The Grand Complication, not The Great Imperfection. Oh well, I figure I read it sometime before 2007, so you'll have to forgive my poor memory. So, what themes did I miss? That was 3 themes around the subject of school. I'm keen to hear what themes you would add if you were going to add one. Drop by Board Game Geek Guild 3269 and let me know, or join the conversation there. Tell a friend about the podcast if you think it's interesting. We have 21 members in our guild, and I know that we have more people than that who listen, or maybe more people who have subscribed. I'm not sure how many of you are listening, but thank you if you are. Or if you haven't done so yet, it would be great to get a review of the show. That helps us get more of an audience as well if we get recommended. I say we, it's just me and my daughter's old cell phone. So thanks for joining me today. I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.